welcome to This Is Lit, a podcast where we drink and talk about our favorite books. I'm Alison.
And I'm Casey. And welcome to a special maternity episode of This Is Lit. So raise a glass and let's get started. All right, Allie, do you want to tell everybody what we're drinking today?
Yes, today we are drinking a very cheap but delicious Riesling by Chateau Saint Michel.
Chateau Saint Michel. So fancy. I love it. Well, it's pretty good.
Yeah, I think so. It tastes better than it cost.
Which is the important thing,
yeah.
Really. But yeah, so today we are talking again with, we've got a guest here. This is Alison. She is a friend of Liz's and now a friend of mine. That is stepping in for Liz on this second maternity episode here. So welcome.
Thank you. Very excited to be here.
And she's also the one who recommended the book for this episode, which is Lisa Jewell's The Family Upstairs.
It's an interesting title.
Yes. And I guess it would qualify as a mystery.
Like a mystery
or
thriller.
Suspense,
yeah.
Something. What's it got in the front here? You can always, maybe it might not have this because this is the publisher edition.
I'll bet it goes in the thriller section at the bookstore.
It doesn't look like it has it. Usually on that first page there's one, but it looks like it doesn't have it in this. But yeah, I'd imagine thriller or suspense. The story is framed by, there's three different narrators, which is a whole thing. There are three different narrators, but Libby is the one who kind of frames the story.
Yes, she's the main character it kind of opens up with.
Mm-hmm. She is a 25-year-old English orphan, I guess. I mean, she's been adopted, but when she was maybe 18 months old, I think is what they said.
Yes.
She was found in a bassinet in this big, fancy house in Chelsea.
Big mansion.
And she was the only living person in the house. It was her, and then there were three dead adults in the kitchen on the floor who looked like they'd been poisoned. They were all wearing black robes. And it was very mysterious, obviously. They had left a suicide note. It kind of made them look like a cult. But also neighbors had reported that there were other people who lived there, including other children. But Libby's the only one who was there.
So she's kind of learning about all of this on her 25th birthday because it's her 25th birthday. A letter has come to her saying that she's now in possession of the house. And she's meeting with a detective who worked on the case to find out more.
Yeah, she's, the thing is interesting about this book is, I assume Lisa Jewell is British?
I don't know, actually.
Again, this doesn't,
I think it has she is.
To my UK editor, to my US editor. Yeah, again, this is, the copy that I read from was an advanced reader's edition that Alison had, and, so it doesn't have some of the standard stuff, but I'm pretty sure she's British, and the book is very British.
Very much so. It much
kind of expects you to know a lot about Britain. Like, for example, like I didn't know before reading this book that like a house in Chelsea is like worth several million dollars.
Yeah, I think she said she sold it, or like it was worth like $750 million or something.
Not like $2 million, like $700 million, like something insane.
Right, and the house had history, and it was a very, very old mansion as well, but it was also in a very affluent neighborhood, and so obviously this 25-year-old woman suddenly comes into a lot of money and a huge mystery.
Yeah, well, it's interesting because that's the first we get of Libby's character is she has this tiny little apartment that she basically scrimps and saves to be able to afford. She sells kitchens, she's a kitchen designer, and she sells kitchens for a living. But her mom, her adoptive mother, who adopted her after she was found in the house, is kind of flighty, Libby kind of had to be the adult in the relationship.
Yeah, she kind of talks just about how she got that organized, kind of schedule-oriented personality from being the adult longer than she was the child.
And so she's kind of taking it all pretty well in stride until she goes to visit the house. And then she starts to feel kind of more curious about it, and that's when she contacts the detective.
Right.
Now, the other two narrators are Lucy and Henry. And we don't know much about them at this point. The thing that was interesting to me about this is that Libby and Lucy's chapters are both written in third person limited.
Yes, and Henry's are written in first person.
And not only that, but theirs are written in present tense. And that's kind of your first clue, because the book it jumps around through several different decades. But they don't explicitly tell you that right off the bat.
Right. You kind of have to follow along until it clicks into place.
And one of the first clues you have is that all of Henry's chapters are written in the past tense, first person past tense, and all of Libby and Lucy's chapters are written in third person limited present tense. So that was kind of not something I was super thrilled with. Like, I understand why it was done.
Sure.
But to me, it was kind of jarring to finish a chapter and go into another chapter of the same book and be in an entirely different tense.
Yeah. I'm biased because I love first-person narration. I don't know why, but it's just... It clicks well with me, so I kind of enjoyed it just because I've never seen another book that used both.
Yeah, that's true. I've definitely never seen that.
The first time it did switch, I was like, wait, hang on.
Yeah, it's a little jarring. Yeah, I definitely got used to it, and it was fine. But I don't know if you've heard me say this before on the podcast. I know I've said it to Liz 1,000 times. First person doesn't really do it for me most of the time. Yeah. I don't know. I associate it with like really badly written fan fiction from like 20 years ago. Well, I don't think you're alone in
that. I think I'm the odd one in that regard, but I'm fine with that.
But especially with the character of Henry, I do think it ends up working really well because he is what we like to call an unreliable narrator.
Very unreliable depending on what you believe by the end of the book.
Yeah, and that's the other thing is that we're going to be talking about this, but like I'll say it up front right now. This book is not linear, so discussing the plot of this book is going to be more difficult than usual.
Yeah, and also just a warning, there are some really dark and interesting themes in this book, but they do go to some dark places. So.
Yeah, and there are a couple of scenes that when we discuss the scene, I will let you know before we discuss the scene what the scene is specifically about, because there are some places you might want to skip ahead a little bit, because I probably would like that opportunity if I had it.
Right. It was an intense book.
So, yeah, it was very intense, but it starts off pretty innocuous. This 25-year-old girl has just inherited a multi-million-dollar estate. She hooks up with a detective, he's actually an investigative journalist. What is his name?
His name's Miller.
Miller, right.
Right, because he wrote a piece a few years ago about this mystery and about the fact that the baby, as Libby was called when she was found in the house, with all the murdered people, is about to be 25 and about to come into the house. So he wrote an article about this, and she decides to reach out to him to see what else he knows, if anything.
Now, Miller is kind of the opposite of Libby. Libby's very much a control freak. She likes things to be organized. She's very detail-oriented, and all of that is because of her kind of tumultuous childhood. But Miller is kind of like, I don't know, Miller is kind of a character I would relate to more. He's like, I want to figure out a thing, so I'm just going to go do it. Like, at one point, they're, like, in somebody's house interviewing them, and he just, like, takes some mail or something. Because he's like, this looks like it might be useful to my investigation.
He's like, very driven towards his purpose.
Well, he mentions that he actually he ruined his marriage. He had at one point been married, and his wife had left him because he had let himself get so consumed by this story trying to solve it. And so Miller is the reason that we find out that there were, in fact, other children living in the house. And one of those children was Henry. And his chapters, like I think Henry's first chapter says, and this is where the title of the book comes from, is that like everything changed for him when the other family moved in upstairs.
Yeah, and I think that's really our first clue as well when we find out there are other children in the house, that the first few kind of prologue chapters were point of view from the children in the house. And then we hear Henry's first mention of the events that are about to follow when he mentions that a woman and her child show up to live in their house.
Yes. So Henry is the son of a socialite and like kind of a rich golf type. His father's name is
Henry.
Also Henry. Yeah. I thought it was a different H name. So his father's name is also Henry. His mother was kind of a socialite. She was in the social circles. And then he has a sister whose name he does not actually mention for a long time.
Does not mention for a while.
Although, as a reader, you pick it up pretty quick, I think.
Right, yeah. They definitely make you figure out who's who.
Who is who, who's done and what. People are not always 100% honest about who they are.
Right.
But we know that the house in Chelsea started as being owned by this rich man and his wife, and they had 2 children, a boy and a girl. And then the socialite, the wife, makes friends with a woman called Bertie. And Bertie is a folk violinist.
Yes, very very demanding job, I assume.
A very interesting job for sure. I play the violin, actually.
Oh, that's cool.
I don't know that I've ever been good enough to have a professional career of it.
Are you a folk violinist?
A little bit of folk music, more classical is kind of what I was trained in. But I did think that was interesting that she was successfully making a career, had actually had a kind of a one-hit wonder.
Right.
And then ended up leaving the band whenever they didn't continue to succeed after that one-hit wonder. But she and her boyfriend, Justin.
Right.
She and her boyfriend, Justin, move into the house temporarily.
Right. At the beginning, they say it's just going to be for a few days, but then I think it's like a week or so later, they move in their cat. Mm-hmm. And then a little while after that, the mom, Martina, tells her son, Henry, that they're just going to stay indefinitely.
And Henry hates this. Henry is a very odd child.
Their kids are like, and he's like, what, 8 maybe at that age?
At that point, oh God, was he
maybe
8
10?
That young? I thought maybe 10.
I don't remember exactly how old they are, but they're around that age range. Not quite preteens, but not any younger
He's
than
the
that.
older of the two children.
Yes.
But yeah, they're probably preteens when Birdie first moves in. And Henry is a very odd child. I think probably because this part of the book takes place in, I guess it would be like the 70s, right?
I think it was like...
Or the 80s.
88 or 89?
Yeah, so it would have been like the 80s.
Late 80s.
Yeah, it's in the late 80s, and Birdie moves into the house with her boyfriend, Justin, and they are very weird. They move into the servants' quarters. Mm-hmm. This is one of those houses that has one of those weird kind of wood paneling sideboards that opens up into like basically a secret upstairs.
Yeah, kind of like one of those dark old houses with a lot of paneling and some like a house that feels like it's going to have secret passageways.
And they kind of almost are secret passageways.
Right. It's just like this servants' quarters area. It's very interestingly described.
So Henry does not like Birdie, and she doesn't like Henry. Henry is a very odd kid. I imagine if Henry had been born in a more modern time, I imagine if Henry had been in a household that was more stable, he probably would have been diagnosed with some form of autism or Asperger's.
Something.
Or maybe something even more severe than that. He does not seem to have a huge amount of emotional intelligence or sympathy for other people.
No, he seems like a very intellectually intelligent person, but past that, there's not a lot of emotional
And he doesn't even seem necessarily attached to his parents. Like, he even talks about his father, like, very judgmentally. Like, his dad has a stroke pretty early on. And he mentions that his father is diminished and weak. Like,
right, he never recovered, and he's almost, like, angry about it.
Yeah, it's less of a concern for, like, a person you love and more of a, like, why are you so weak and why are you letting, like, biology control your body?
Yeah, like he kind of ruined Henry's life by having a stroke.
Henry's very self-absorbed. Whatever else he may be, he is very, very self-absorbed, and that's apparent right off the bat.
Right.
Which I think also makes it... I think that's effective because off the bat, you already feel like you don't 100% trust Henry's narration. And so you're like, well, maybe Birdie is not that bad.
Right. I mean, you definitely question, especially since he's a child. You question whether, like, well, maybe you don't know the context of everything going on. I don't know. It's definitely...
It's hard to tell.
Yes.
And so, anyway, Birdie moves in. Justin, her pothead boyfriend, moves in, starts a fancy garden in the backyard, and shortly thereafter, Henry Sr. has a stroke, and
another stroke,
and Birdie volunteers someone that she knows, a doctor, to come to the house and help him.
Yes,
and that's when David comes in.
David Thompson.
David and his wife.
And their 2 children.
What is his wife's name?
Sally.
Sally, that's right.
And then
David, Sally, Phineas.
Clemency and Phineas.
Yeah. Phineas
with
and Clemency.
With a PH.
And Clemency is about the same age as Henry's sister.
Yes.
So they hit it off right away. Phineas is a couple of years older than Henry. And he is the epitome of cool.
Yes.
He's blonde. He's got these full lips. He's got these long eyelashes. And honestly, at first, when Henry was describing this, I thought it was just him being that very analytical, minded kind of person.
Right.
Just like, well, he's a very handsome young man. He's very good looking, blah, blah, blah.
He describes a lot of people in that detail, so it didn't initially trigger my, ooh, interesting kind of senses.
I didn't pick up on it at first, but it does become pretty quickly
very clear,
apparent that he has got
A big crush.
A big crush on Phineas.
Hardcore.
And again, this is the 80s, and it's not going to be a well-received thing, but the book never does dwell on, like, Henry is gay in a way that's, like he doesn't spend a lot of time, like, agonizing or wallowing in it. It's just, like,
they have a lot of other problems at the same time.
Yeah. And it's, like, for Henry, it's almost like it's just a fact he knows about himself, and he's, like, aware that it's something that he's not ever going to be able to do anything with, so he just kind of acknowledges it and moves on, which is bizarre to me from my perspective.
I thought the same thing. We're both members of the LGBT community, and reading that, I just remember thinking, like, I'm so glad that he's confident and doesn't question it, but at the same time, like, you're so young, like, where did that come from? Especially in the 80s, and when they talk about his parents, I doubt that they're, like, pro-gay advocates, That's just not the parents they described, so.
Well, and it's also that fine line of, like, again, you want to see more, like, queer representation in stories, but by the time we've gotten to the end of this book, I was actually kind of upset at the choice to make Henry gay.
Me too!
I was like, did you have to make him gay? Didn't
love it. In fact, I have a whole, like, spiel, but
I'm
I can't get there till the end.
Yeah, but we're not there yet. So David and his wife, Sally, and their 2 kids move in. So this house has gone from being a family of 4 to being, what would that be? 4, 8
plus
10.
10.
10 people living in and it is a mansion.
Plus, like, what, 2 cats? And something else, like, I don't know.
Yeah, then there's like the pet.
Like a lot of people in this house.
David is a person that I feel like I have known in real life.
Seriously, I felt like he's
a motivational speaker. He's not a doctor. He's like a physiotherapist.
Or at least that's what he's come into the house to do for Henry Sr.
Physiotherapy, a motivational speaking, spiritual guidance.
Very charismatic.
When you combine those things together, you're already starting to see a particular picture.
Yes. Very, very charismatic. Very quietly, charmingly narcissistic. But he makes an impression on this family.
And this is kind of when things start to go wrong for them.
For sure.
But I want to take a minute to jump away from that story and talk about our third narrator, Lucy. So Lucy is a middle-aged woman, a middle-aged homeless woman in Nice, France.
Yes, in France.
And she's got 2 children of her own.
2 children, Marco
and Stella. And they have and then also a dog.
Yes. Fitz, right.
William.
I was just so impressed that she, with all her problems and her 2 kids and her homelessness, she kept that dog with them the whole time.
Yes.
Like,
so
she's loyal.
So Lucy is also, unfortunately, a character that I have known is a single mom who has kids from 2 different relationships, has an abusive ex-husband, and she is homeless at this point.
She's just trying everything she can to put 2 nickels together. And
so when we first meet her, she is trying to figure out how to get enough money to pay for her violin repair. She's dropped her violin off at a repair shop. We find out that she plays in the street for tips, and that's how she pays her bills. And so she drops Stella off at Stella's grandmother's house. So Stella's father was a man that she was very, very deeply in love with, but who left her and left France altogether. And Stella's grandmother kind of blames Lucy for this.
Yeah, which I found really strange.
Yeah. Well, I didn't find it strange. I found it unfair, but it didn't surprise me.
I guess that's the word I'm looking for. I
don't know about you. I come from a pretty mixed family myself.
Same.
I think about my brother has 2 kids with a girl that he's no longer with, and she and my mom have a very contentious relationship because anytime that my brother and his ex fight, she kind of takes it out on my mom, who is the primary caretaker for her grandsons.
No, that makes perfect sense.
So it's always very complicated when you've got the kind of mixed family dynamic.
Yes, very complicated, especially in this time and in her situation, because she really has nothing and needs a lot of help, and is not receiving any help.
Yeah.
But I think what I found strange about the grandmother was she goes to ask her for help because she can't pay her bills and she needs, her children are homeless, they're living on the street, and the grandmother's response is that she'll take one of the kids for one night.
But she'll take one of the kids for one night, and the kid that she'll take is her grandkid.
Right, but it just like
that's, I I think there are a lot of people who are, like, good people who would have tried to take in both kids.
Right. But it's just for one night. Like, that just made me angry.
Yeah. I mean, I know she's got a sick sister, I think, who lives with her as well. The grandmother does.
I didn't remember that.
And so, like, I understand, like, you know, everybody has their struggles and whatnot. But, yeah, it did seem very cold, especially to, like, look at these two children and be like, you're not mine, and so I don't care about you.
Yeah.
Very harsh. But Marco is a really cool kid. He's very smart. He's like 12.
I think so,
but
yes.
he's been through all this shit, and so he is...
he's kind of also a small adult, but in different ways than Libby. In more streetwise ways than I think more organized ways. But
yes, for sure.
He's very smart, and he is very motivated in helping his mother.
Mm-hmm. And so he is the one who comments, and this is how we see Lucy begin to tie back to the other two stories we're telling, because the connection between Libby and Henry, while not 100% clear how they would relate to each other, like they are both related to the house.
Right, so it's clear how they
the connection,
relate, but Lucy's still a mystery at this
point.
Lucy's
still a mystery, but then Marco sees on Lucy's shabby smartphone that she manages to keep, she's got a notification on her phone, the baby is turned to 25.
Yeah, she gets a notification that she set up years ago.
Yeah.
Telling her that this has finally happened.
The baby is 25. And
we can only assume she's talking about Libby.
Right. The Marco doesn't know anything about it, but it's, again, that's like that dramatic irony, right? The reader knows, well, there's a 25-year-old who was called the baby, who is in one of these other chapters, so it must be referring to the same character.
Yes.
But at this point, we don't really know more than that.
Right, how that all ties together. It's still very mysterious at this point.
So, to jump back into Henry's story, after David and Sally move in, things kind of start to take a turn for the worse. They've already been crowded and cramped, and now they find themselves in a situation where his family does not seem to be the primary house people who own the house anymore.
Right. It's as if their house is not theirs anymore.
Yes.
It now belongs to sort of everyone, but primarily David.
And things start going missing.
Yes.
Paintings, furniture, things start going missing, and different amounts of control are starting to be exerted on people. The first big thing that happens is that Henry sees David and Birdie kissing.
Yes. And at the time, Birdie and her boyfriend still live here, and David and his wife still live here, so that's a big revelation.
So, Henry, and this is another example of Henry not really having comprehension of other people's feelings, because Henry's response to seeing this is to go and, without any kind of warning or sympathy, to just tell Phineas about it.
Yeah, he just tells David's son about this, and Finn is brokenhearted. It's his dad, and he's kissing some other woman.
Yeah, but Henry, it didn't even occur to Henry that this might hurt, and Henry even says that. It's like he's like, I didn't even think about it. To me, it didn't make sense why that would hurt him.
That was one of, not the first moments, but that was one of, I think, the most clear moments, I think, in the beginning, where I was like, something's just a little different.
A little bit different with you. But what it really came down to is Henry wanted Phineas's attention.
Definitely.
And he saw this as an opportunity to get it.
Yes.
And it works, for the most part, because
Absolutely.
Phineas steals some money from his dad, and the two of them go out on the town.
Yeah.
They take a cab down to the market, and they see a bunch of cool stuff, and they buy some things. He buys a cowboy shoelace tie for himself. Henry does. And then...
what every teen wanted.
What every teen wants. And then he and Phineas go back to the house, and Phineas reveals that someone in the record shop had slipped him 2 tabs of acid. Mm-hmm. Because, again, this is the 80s, so people were
Acid's everywhere,
it's
right?
Everywhere. Sure. Phineas shows Henry a secret way to get out of the house and up onto the roof. Mm-hmm. And he's like, let's go up here and take acid. And so they do.
Which, if I was going to take acid, the roof is exactly where I would
place
go.
For it. Yeah, absolutely.
Totally.
Have you ever taken acid?
No, actually.
I haven't either, but I've done mushrooms.
Oh.
Which is similar.
Yeah, I've heard.
I did that, and I went and saw Panic at the Disco.
Ooh,
and
that would be better than being on a roof.
Oh, well, yes. Any room that Brendan Urie is in is automatically the best room that exists.
Well, that's obvious.
But anyway, yeah, so they go on the roof and they take acid. And one of those side effects of psychedelic drugs tends to be like a really intense connection between people who are taking them together.
For sure.
And so they get very close, but it does not last for very long because then they decide to go back into the house while they're still high.
Yes, which is instantly does not go well.
They get caught by David. Mm-hmm. And
yes, they do.
This is the first time that David locks somebody up because he throws Phineas in his room and locks him in there.
Yeah, for days.
And that's the point at which it becomes less of like vaguely menacing. It becomes like outright.
Right. It's no longer one of those things where like you can't prove David's done anything and like where nothing's been clear and right there on the page. But this is that moment where it's like, okay, he's locked someone in a room now.
But the real crux of the issue is David doesn't lock Phineas in his room necessarily because he's high. It's because Phineas comes into the house and starts shouting about the affair that he's having with Birdie.
Yes.
And outs him to everyone else in the house.
Uh-huh.
And so
the house is immediately plunged into a lot of chaos.
Yeah, Birdie and David move into a room together.
Uh-huh. Sally leaves. David's wife.
She just leaves. Which that's so another angry. Talking about people behaving in a way that is super selfish. Like the grandmother, she just leaves her 2 kids with this guy.
Right.
And just
How
goes.
could you just leave?
Yeah.
I don't even know.
Yeah, absolutely wild. She leaves. Birdie moves into David's room, and Justin continues to live there. Justin seems to be the only adult with any kind of sense left in him, which is wild.
Yeah.
It's still very much a like self-serving, very much like a I'm just trying to survive this thing.
Right.
But he
seems like a guy who's just trying to make the best situation
of a bad situation
of what he's in.
Yeah. And so Justin continues to stay in the house, and he basically takes Henry on as an assistant in the garden.
Right, and his like drugs growing business.
So he grows. I'm sure he's like growing pot in the garden, but he's also growing, different herbs and supplements that he can put into teas and that he can help people in the house. And he brings Henry in on this because Henry desperately needs occupation because Finn is no longer speaking to him because he has been locked in his room for weeks.
Yeah.
Due to Henry's behavior.
So, yeah, things are tense between him and Finn, and he spends a lot of time with Justin, learning a lot. I think more than Justin probably intended him to learn.
Probably, yeah.
But, yeah, things in the house change very quickly. David and Birdie move into a room together, as we said, and things between them intensify.
They seem to exacerbate the worst traits in each other.
Yes.
Like, David is kind of controlling at the beginning, and Birdie is kind of mean.
Yes.
But together he becomes like a tyrant, and she just gets joy out of being cruel to other people.
Right.
Like they exacerbate these worst possible traits in each other, and very soon there is a huge list of rules painted on the wall.
Huge list of rules. And at this point already, earlier in the book, the children are already being homeschooled because they can't afford public school, the parents. The dad doesn't work because he had a stroke.
He doesn't really respond to much of anything.
He doesn't really. He's kind of just a vegetable. And so already these people are constantly in the house. They're not really leaving to go to work or school.
And then the rules are made that they're not allowed to leave the house.
Yes. And all of a sudden they're not allowed to leave.
First big rules. They're not allowed to leave the house. It's like you have to do 2 hours of music lessons with Birdie in the music room every day. You have to do 4 hours of exercise with David in the exercise room, which used to be the parlor.
And the money.
And the money, yeah.
That was a big thing. So Martina, Henry's mom, next tells Henry that they're going to be living differently. They're going to be living more charitably, is how she puts it. But really what's happening is that David has convinced her that it is more charitable to give all of her money to him so that he can donate it.
And all of her possessions as well.
All of her possessions. And she's decided this is the way they're going to live. So all of a sudden they're trapped in the house. People are bringing out the worst in each other. And now they're also very strapped for money.
No money. Nobody has shoes.
They're
all wearing these black robes.
Got rid of all the alcohol. Yeah, right. The robes start coming out.
Yeah.
It gets really weird
very, very
fast.
quickly. And that's legitimate. Like, that's how it happens. Like, the whole, like, we haven't said it yet, but, like, obviously the word cult is, like, percolating in your brains.
Yeah.
There. And, like, the way that a cult, someone takes control of a household or a community and turns it into a cult, it happens just that fast.
Yeah. In fact, I think probably the most interesting bit of this book to me was watching that progression, because a long time ago I read the nonfiction book Helter Skelter about, Charles Manson and all that stuff. And, we've all heard about it in popular culture, but just watching the sort of descent into this insanity through all of these people that didn't necessarily mean for it to end up that way.
Right.
It's fascinating, but that's exactly how it happens.
Yeah, it is. And it's just getting more and more intense, and at this point we're jumping back and forth between Libby and Lucy even more frequently.
Yes.
Libby has, at this point, visited the house, explored the house, heard noises in the house as though there was someone there.
Right, but she couldn't find anyone.
She couldn't find anyone, but she did find, scribbled in several places throughout the house, "I am Finn."
Yes, she found this written all over different walls and
in drawers,
baseboards, in drawers, like in weird places.
And so she's getting kind of spooked about it, and that's when she and her friend Dido, who was her coworker, decide to come with Miller to the house to explore, to stay the night.
They decide to stay a night and see what they can find, see if they can find anything interesting, see if they hear anything.
And so they stay the night, and during the night they hear someone in the house, and down comes a blonde man, middle-aged, and he introduces himself as Finn.
He says, "I'm Finn, used to live here. I knew you were turning 25, so I had to come see you.
I needed to come see you." So at this point, it's just like, it's very wild. They're like, okay, so we seem to have found Phineas. They actually go with him across the street. He's like, "Oh, I live in these apartments across the street. I'm an IT guy. I make all this money." Very fancy apartments across the street that have a perfect view of the house.
Yes.
And they're a little bit spooked, but they sit with him and they drink with him, and he tells them some stories about the house. And these are a lot of the same stories that we're getting from Henry's point of view in the other chapters. And that's kind of jumps back and forth between them being with Phineas in the apartment and Henry in the house and what he's seeing happen.
Right, and that's a big part of, too, making all those connections between the past and the future is this moment, meeting Finn in the house.
And meanwhile, Lucy has gotten her violin back with the help of her ex-husband.
Right, and now she is trying to figure out, she's decided it's time to go back to England, which is where she's from, and face what happened in the house and face her past and all this stuff, but she is living in France illegally, so she has to get
her kids don't
fake
have a passport.
passports to get home. And
so her ex-husband, what was his name?
Michael.
Garbage Man. Michael, that's right.
Garbage Man was his name.
So Michael, we've already met Michael at this point, unfortunately, because while Stella was staying with Grandma, Marco and Lucy went to Michael's house, and she asked him for money to get her violin back.
Right, and he does give it to her.
He gives it to her, but not in such a way
generously.
That she feels, he's very, you can tell immediately from this encounter that he's a very controlling type, that he likes to feel like he's in control of someone. He likes to feel like they owe him something.
Yeah.
And there's an indication there that he expects from her something. And so she ends up coming back to his house and saying, "Listen, I need a passport for myself, for the kids, and I need a pet passport for the dog because we need to go to England. I have a friend who's very ill, and I want to go see her before it's too late."
Yeah.
And so Michael more or less insinuates, "I will get these things for you as long as you sleep with me."
Yeah.
And Michael, by the way, is remarried at this point. His wife is just out of town. But of course, it's that kind of guy, you know.
He's so gross.
He's very, very, very gross. Worst character than Thing, including David.
Including David, yeah.
Man. So Lucy has decided that there's a lot of time spent on this, and I do not like it. I feel like it's honest, but there's a lot of time spent on Lucy and how afraid she is and how sick she feels and how much she doesn't want to go there and do this, but she feels like she has to so they can get out of the country. Right. And it's just it's just exhausting to read.
It was very exhausting and very painful, especially for anyone who's been through that kind of an assault.
Yeah.
Or who has been through that kind of controlling relationship. Very painful for Lucy as well. I also was a little bit surprised at how much time they spent on it. Not necessarily because it was emotionally difficult. I mean, that was just a side effect of it being long.
Right.
But just because it was still kind of a prologue, because there's so much going on.
She hasn't even we still don't even know how Lucy is connected to the baby.
Right. And so I was a little bit okay, I get it, your life is hard, but get to England and figure out how it's all connected. I was still searching for that connection at this point.
But to put no fine point on it, I don't really want to waste a bunch of time on this. So she goes back to Michael's house, and this is information that will be triggering to some people. She goes back to Michael's house, has dinner with him, is planning to have sex with him, but she cuts herself on the counter, and he rapes her, and she kills him.
Yep.
She stabs him in the neck with a piece of glass that cut her, which fucking serves him right.
Right.
And so she kills him, and then she panics. She's
absolutely.
like her first thought is, I could call the police, and I would not go to jail for this because I was defending myself. It is very clear. Her second thought is, I'm here illegally, and my children are sleeping in the like small apartment that we like, the hotel room that we have booked for the night.
She's terrified that they'll be separated.
We're going to be separated. They're going to be sent back to England. God only knows.
Right.
And so she just very methodically cleans up the whole house, drags his body down to the wine cellar, goes back to the house, gets her kids, and leaves the fucking country.
Right. It was very efficient. She made her decision. She did what she had to do. She gets out of France.
And like, honestly, as a reader, like, my sympathy is completely with her. I feel no
100%.
I feel no need for anyone to be punished for this man's death.
Absolutely not.
You're just like, well,
no, absolutely
the only bad thing about Michael dying is that it didn't happen sooner.
Right. I remember thinking, like, I hope this isn't one of the things that comes back to bite her, just because that would be so unfair and infuriating, and I would have not enjoyed that.
Yeah, that would have really upset me.
Yeah.
But she does successfully get her kids, her pet, even her dog.
Even the dog
gets a pet passport, and the four of them get back to England. And at this point, Miller and Libby have realized Phineas is very strange.
Right.
He doesn't seem to communicate well with people. He locks them in the bedroom overnight.
Right. They decide to stay a night and chat with Finn, and they
get
decide
very,
to have a
very
drink.
drunk.
Well, they decide to have a drink with him, and then they're surprised at how quickly they get drunk. And then the next thing they know, they're waking up.
Locked in a bedroom.
Locked in this bedroom.
And they don't have their phones.
Yeah.
And so it becomes, so Phineas wakes up in the morning and says, oh, I sleepwalk. I was super drunk, so I locked the door so I wouldn't walk in on you guys in the middle of the night. They're like, what about our phones? Why aren't they charged? And he's like, oh, here are your phones. And she's like, I thought we put them on a charger last night. Like, it's all very weird.
It's just very, like, there's nothing to prove, but it's...
And he hasn't hurt them.
Right, they're fine.
Or even said anything threatening.
In fact, the only thing I think they noticed that's different is that there's a recording from Miller's phone missing.
That has been deleted.
Yes.
Yeah, because Miller put it all on the record, and it appears that Phineas has deleted that. So it does seem sinister, but it does also seem like maybe he's like wanted to share, but he wasn't comfortable with it being on the record, but didn't know how to communicate it. So you're like, okay, fine, whatever. Mm-hmm. You can kind of blow it off.
But it's their first clue that there's just something else going on with him in the house.
And then, in Henry's story, things are just going from bad to worse.
Immediately.
No one's allowed shoes. And then we find out that Martina is pregnant.
And this is Henry's mom. And this is back in the 80s.
Yeah.
She is pregnant.
David makes an announcement to the house.
David's baby.
That he has intentionally impregnated this woman.
And Bertie does not seem to care. In fact,
Bertie says, I can't have children, so this is for the family. This will bring all of our families together, finally.
All of a sudden, they are a family, by the way, in quotes. They're not, they're the family, you know? They're not, your family and my family, we live together in this house. And
David's like, this is my family.
They are a family. David is in charge.
The head of the family. Mm-hmm. And so Henry thinks that this pregnancy is to combine the families together. Justin, right before he leaves, says it's probably something a little more sinister. Right. And
I will state, too, it's never... Justin leaves in this period. However, it's a little mysterious. He leaves in the middle of the night and is, like, never heard from again, right? Mm-hmm. So...
There's no telling if Justin actually successfully left or if David
murdered him. I wondered that, too. Like, did he really leave... Or, like, maybe...
he tells Henry that he's thinking about leaving. Right. And it's not like a few weeks later he leaves. It's like the next day he is gone.
It's like the next day, right. It's just in the middle of the night.
So he could have maybe left... So, there's no telling. Justin could have left for real, or he could have been murdered and buried in the backyard.
Right. We don't know.
We don't know.
But and Justin's gone. Martina's pregnant. David's very proud.
And Henry's disgusted with his mother.
He's furious. And so, like, he's as harsh on his mother as he was on his father when he had a stroke. Like, it's like a personal affront.
Mm-hmm. And she's gone. Like, this woman is gone. She's just like, this is what's best for the family, and I'm very excited about it, blah, blah, blah.
Completely taken over and taken in by David. And I think, as well, was never really one of those, like, strong personalities that would stand on her own anyway. I think she cleaved pretty closely to her husband until he had a stroke. So she's just that kind of woman. And this man has just taken this position of worship and power in her eyes. And now she's pregnant. It's a great thing. Henry's himself. Henry is beside himself. This is where things get really interesting. Because it's been jumping back and forth, Libby, Lucy, Henry. And there's a chapter with Henry, and Henry says that he starts going through the books that Justin left him, and he starts giving his mother teas with different plants and things in them that cause people to miscarry. Right. He starts intentionally adding things to his mom's food and her drinks to try to get her to miscarry this baby because he's so mad that she got pregnant.
He's mad that she got pregnant. She's mad that he's betrayed their family,
the house.
And he is also afraid of how much more control David will have over all of them if this baby is born.
Very much so. I think he also mentions, too, that David is really fascinated by the house itself and how much it's worth and all the money, and that he kind of feels like having this baby would just kind of cement David's control over everything.
David would basically be able to own the house because he would have a blood link to it.
Right. It's very complicated.
So, long story short, the chapter ends, quite shockingly, with Martina miscarrying this baby. The baby is stillborn. And we're like, as a reader, I was like, but then who is Libby?
I know.
That was my immediate...
I really thought that Libby was the
Martine and David's baby. But she's not.
That
and
baby
that was a really good shock
fruition.
moment. Yeah, that baby dies and is buried in the garden.
Yes, I was shocked at that too.
Well, I was shocked at it, and then immediately, I mean, within pages.
Oh, yeah.
I was like, I know it's going to happen next.
Yeah. Yep. I saw that coming too, unfortunately.
So, unfortunately, again, this is some more dark subject matter for you, so skip ahead if you want to. Very soon after Martina miscarries, David drops her, and he gets Henry's 14-year-old sister pregnant.
David makes an announcement that Lucy's pregnant.
And by the way, at this point we know that Lucy is Henry's sister.
Yes, they have.
At this point, we have shared that. Yeah, it's actually shared in conjunction with her pregnancy. We find out that Henry's sister is pregnant, and in the next sentence, we find out that Lucy is Henry's sister.
Right. So this all happened a few decades ago, and so now we're all wondering, is Libby her child potentially? But we just found out she's pregnant, so
so it's a mess. So Libby and Miller go to another small town. I don't even remember the town. And they find
if anyone cares.
They find Sally,
who will not talk to them. She is
wants nothing to do with it.
Almost like, like when people get angry because they're afraid. Yeah. That's what it felt like to me.
Yeah, and she's like, don't talk to me. You cannot talk to my daughter. I want nothing to do with you.
Yeah. She essentially throws them out. And she won't tell them where Clemency is, her daughter.
Yeah.
Who also lived in the house, because they're just trying to find out all this information. And she won't share that. But
Miller figures it out.
And they figure out where Clemency lives anyway.
In the same town.
And they go to see her.
And they go to see Clemency. And Clemency is willing to talk to them.
Yes. In fact, I think she's almost relieved
to
talk to them.
Talk to somebody.
Right. She needs to go over all of this. And so really, that's where a lot of the information starts.
Yes. Clemency is the one who confirms for Libby that she is, in fact, Lucy's child. Not
David's
Martina's
child.
And she says that, because basically Clemency cut Lucy off as a friend after this happened in the house. Was just disgusted by her, didn't want anything to do with her.
Well, she's having a baby with her dad. Yeah. Plus, I don't think at that age she was able to even process and understand that, let alone deal with it.
Right. Well, Lucy, like, again,
very
like,
traumatized.
they're like, oh, yeah, this was a consent, like, Lucy's like, oh, yeah, this was a consensual relationship.
She says it was consensual, but, it's a cult, and she's 14. And he's, like, 30 or 40.
It's
like,
not. Even Henry realizes that. Even Henry says, I think at some point, he's like, I'm pretty sure that it's still considered a non-consensual relationship, even if you think it was consensual, if you're under a certain age.
Because you're 14.
You're 14.
Right. He even points it out, and Lucy kind of brushes it off at that point, but, she's already kind of in deep at this point.
Yeah, what's she going to do?
Right.
And so, Clemency confirms all this information for Libby and Miller, and then Clemency also confirms something else, which is that the man that they met was not Phineas.
No.
Because she's actually very excited when she hears it's Phineas, because she hasn't seen her brother in 15 years.
Right.
She thought he was dead. She says, we left him in the house. Like, I ran, and I thought he was dead.
Right. And Finn, throughout a lot of the book in the 80s, is sick.
Gets very
as well. And it goes untreated because they're not allowed to leave the house, this cult mentality. And so... yeah, she says, well, we left him in the house. I thought he was dead. I ran.
Not only we left him in the house, he was chained to the radiator.
Right. The picture she paints the last time she saw her brother is like, well, I would assume he was dead too.
He was gray. He was chained to a radiator. The rest of us left. And then we go back to the Henry's point of view for kind of the final breakdown here, which first Henry and Phineas take what's left of the acid.
Right, they've got one more tab left.
Phineas opens back up to Henry a little bit after Lucy gets pregnant. They take that last tab of acid and they go down to the river. And according to Henry, Phineas tries to push him into the river.
Right.
And so he runs back to the house and tells David.
Right. In fact, I think they run back to the house. Phineas follows them. They're standing in front of the door fighting, and then he rings the doorbell so that Finn's very abusive dad will come down and see that they have snuck out of the house.
And then he tells him, Phineas threw me in the river.
Yep. And
so basically,
David locks him in his room for like a week and a half.
Yeah, with no food. And it's awful. During this time, Lucy has the baby.
Yes.
And the baby is named Serenity. And she is beloved in the house. Not only by David and Lucy. Well,
Martine,
Lucy loses
Bertie.
her.
Right.
They basically
David
take the baby
and
away
Bertie essentially take that baby. It's their baby.
And Lucy is devastated by this.
She's heartbroken.
This is what makes her realign her. I think even he says, like, Henry says the loyalties in the house have been realigned several times.
He does say that,
And this is the last time it happens, is like Lucy and Clemency are realigned with Phineas and Henry when Bertie and David take her baby away.
Right. I think that spell is kind of broken over Lucy. Obviously when they take her child.
Yeah.
And, the kids all
start
sort of
plotting.
Come back together and realize that no one's going to get them out of this situation. They've got to figure it out themselves. And they do start plotting, yeah.
So Henry knocks the adults out, Bertie and David.
Right. He gives Bertie and David some of his secret garden herbs, which are like a sleeping draught, or how he describes them.
Into their tea, and they pass out.
Right.
It's like a soporific. And it knocks them out, and he goes into their room and he finds money.
Sneaks into their room, finds
and
cash,
shoes,
whiskey, all the alcohol they'd thrown out of the house because, it wasn't clean or whatever.
Basically, David and Bertie are living in the lap of luxury up here in the bedroom, in the master bedroom, while everybody else in the house is starving.
Following all these
rules.
Repressive rules.
So when he tells the other kids this, he's like, I can make a stronger sleeping draught, and we can knock out all the adults, and we can take the baby and go to the police.
Yeah. And the kids are ready, especially Clem and Finn, too, when they hear about all the stuff that was found in David's room. I think it's Clem, especially, who's just, like, heartbroken.
Yeah. Because she really thought that he was following all of his crazy rules as well.
Right. And that there was a reason for following the rules.
Yeah.
But this is really when that breaks.
And this is when shit breaks bad.
Really badly.
Because first off, we find out what the ingredients in the sleeping draught, quote unquote, are, and the main ingredient is belladonna nightshade.
Yep.
Which, if you have ever seen any, movie or read any book, you know that belladonna nightshade is incredibly toxic to humans.
It's not a sleeping potion.
It's poison.
it's a permanent sleeping potion.
So, celebrating Birdie's 30th birthday, Henry puts this into his father's drink, his mother's drink, David's drink, Birdie's drink.
Everyone's. He tells the other kids that what they're going to do is they're going to put all the adults asleep. They're going to take the baby. They're going to go to the police and tell them everything. That is the plan.
But they are upstairs in David and Birdie's room trying to gather up some money. And Birdie staggers into the room half conscious and attacks them. And Henry takes, and we've heard about this before because Birdie filmed a music video in the house way back when, and like before everything started going missing, there were all these animal heads on the walls, like so elk and deer. Henry takes an antler from one of these and bashes Birdie's skull in. He
attacks her, and like it's not proportionate to the self-defense.
She's literally barely standing.
She's doing her best to attack them, but she's very out of it.
She's a little bitty woman. We've already known that for a long time. And she's out of it. And
super
he
drugged.
Basically just jabs an antler into the back of her skull and kills her.
He kills her very effectively.
And without any kind of compunction about it. He does not seem super panicked
does not seem bothered.
He does seem, and again, this is the unreliable narrator thing, but he does seem panicked whenever Lucy and Clemency come back up the stairs and say,
I see it.
All the adults are dead.
Yeah, they come back upstairs with the big shocker that everyone's dead.
They're not breathing. They don't have a pulse. They're not sleeping.
That sleeping
They're dead.
drug did not put them to sleep. It killed everyone in the house.
And Henry completely takes charge at this point, and it's
Yes.
Kind of in a manner reminiscent of how David has behaved.
That's what I thought too. It made me think a lot about that.
Because
very cool and disconnected.
The first thing he does is not try to comfort anybody. The first thing he does is he makes Clemency chain her brother to the radiator in his room because he's weak and wobbly and he's protesting against what's happening. And he's like, you have to put him on the wall. We have to chain him up. Right. He's going to be in our way.
So they chain Finn to the radiator in his room because Finn is sick, he's delirious, and he's also protesting against everything they're doing, as you just said. And
then
they intend to take him with them later, but this, obviously this is happening very quickly.
Because now they can't go to the police because they've just killed 4 people.
Right.
5 people.
Right.
And
they no longer think they would get away with that.
They wrap Birdie's body up in sheets and stuff it into the gutter up on the roof.
Yes.
That blew my mind.
Me
Because
too.
for the longest time, as I was trying to figure things out in the book, I was like, but there were 4 dead adults. Mm-hmm. Or there were 3 dead adults in the
right,
kitchen.
only 3. And keep in mind,
there was a
Birdie,
woman and 2 men.
Uh-huh.
And I'm like, so where is Birdie in this? We know the woman was Martina. And we know one of the men, and we know the identities of all the dead people from the very beginning.
Yeah.
So where is Birdie in this? Did she escape? No, she's been dead the whole time
she's
too.
On the roof in the gutter.
In the gutter for 15 years.
Uh-huh.
And so they stuff her body up there. Henry rearranges the adults to look like all their feet are facing the same direction. They've all got vials in their hands.
Right. He puts these. It has traces of nightshade, like the vials he used.
He literally says that he wipes them down and presses their fingerprints.
Right, he does say that, yeah, and then he writes
he's very intentional about everything he does, and then he writes a suicide note, and he says, "Okay, let's go over to." Why did they leave the house?
I think just because that was the plan.
Well, because
they didn't want to be caught with.
They leave the house. Clemency, Henry, and Lucy leave the house.
Yeah, and then Clemency...
The baby is still in the bassinet. Phineas is still chained to the radiator. All the adults are dead. And then Clemency runs. She just has a breakdown, and she takes off barefoot down the street.
She just panics.
And Henry chases her for a while, and then he realizes he's not going to be able to catch her. She's got an adrenaline rush, and then Lucy convinces Henry that they need to take Phineas to the doctor. Mm-hmm.
So they go back to the house.
This is the point when we find out the real truth of the matter. Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Because she's very insistent on getting Phineas. She's very worried about Phineas. And Henry says some sharp things to her, like, why do we care, blah, blah, blah. And she tells him, you don't actually think that baby is my baby with David.
Right. She tells him, okay, well, you've always thought this, but that isn't David's baby. It's Finn's.
It's Finn's baby. Because she was doing what would be very natural for a teenage girl to do when she's in a traumatic situation. Right. She was finding comfort
in a hot boy.
With this boy.
That was nice.
Was nice to her and was charming. Gentle with her. And so she's been sleeping with Finn, and she knows the baby is Finn's baby, not David's. He doesn't look anything like David.
Right.
No, she doesn't. The baby, she's, a little blonde baby. And
Henry,
this about does Henry in. Henry's still obsessed with Phineas.
And this is a big blow for Henry.
So Henry goes back to Phineas's room and says that he'll unchain him, but only if Phineas kisses him. Mm-hmm. Which is incredibly fucked up.
It was very fucked up. And this is where I started to feel a little bit annoyed at his sexuality as well. Mm-hmm. Just because it sort of
plays into the trope of predatory gays.
Right. It became this, like, the stereotypical, like, villain gay of, like, I will have you no matter what.
No matter what.
Just very, like...
Yeah.
I just didn't think that this story in particular, with everything else going on, it just didn't need that.
It did not need that.
It didn't need it. It wasn't necessary to the story.
I mean, Henry could have been everything that Henry was without that
Without that, either way, right. And, like, I like to hope that people will realize that, but, in today's...
Right.
time, so
it's
I think
he's gay, and so much of his bad behavior was driven by a desire for a boy.
Right, was driven by that,
and so it's like, it very much is like that. Falls into the predatory gay trope, and it's not pleasant.
No,
but anyway, Henry and Phineas fall asleep on the bed together, mm-hmm. and when Henry wakes up, Finn and Lucy are gone.
They're gone. He's alone with the baby.
And he assumes that they've done as Clemency did and pulled a runner.
Right.
And so he stays for a couple of days, taking care of the baby, feeding her, changing her nappies. And then he's like, this can't continue. Mm-hmm. He adds another line to the end of the suicide note about the baby, still indicating that she is, still indicating that she's one of those adults' baby.
Right.
That's where the confusion comes in. Mm-hmm. This is our baby, Serenity. Please make sure she finds a good home.
Yeah.
Calls the police, gives them an anonymous tip, and flees.
He gets out of the house, right. So that is when the police find 3 dead adults, minus Birdie, who's hidden on the roof, and a baby in her basket.
That also blows my mind.
Uh-huh.
That they don't find Birdie.
Right.
I'm like, you'd think they would have torn this house apart, floorboards down to the floorboards, if they're, but they basically blow it off because they're like, oh, it's a cult suicide.
Right. I think it essentially, and they did talk a little bit about, or there was a line mentioning that just like during that time period, there was a lot of, that's when Manson had just happened before that, and Jim Jones and all this other stuff. So I think they just kind of assume it's a cult thing because that's kind of what's in the media.
It gives credence to that. Like, it looks like that.
Right.
The
Everything seems like that.
The only troubling thing is the missing children.
Exactly. The only thing the police can't figure out that they're still upset about is that the other children are missing.
There were 4
children who are missing.
So jump back to the present. We now know pretty much everything. And Lucy is in the house in the middle of the night.
Yes. She has come back to the house to England.
Waiting for the baby. Yes. That we now know is her baby.
Mm-hmm. And she wants to meet her. And instead, she runs into...
Henry.
Yep.
Henry comes back into the house and finds her. She doesn't even recognize him at first.
And this is the man we've been told was Finn the whole time. Mm-hmm.
Henry introduced himself as Finn.
Mm-hmm. And now with Lucy, she sees who it is.
She knows who he is.
It's Henry, her brother.
And so they see each other, and then Libby and Miller come back, and they meet Lucy, and they find out the truth of Henry, which they kind of learned from Clemency.
Right. Clemency tells them a lot of what we just went over as opposed to what happened in the house on that night. Mm-hmm. But when they come back, they get a lot of it confirmed with
And
Lucy.
Henry says, well, I told you I was Finn because I didn't know.
Right. He kind of comes clean.
He basically says he did it because he didn't know if they were trustworthy, and he just didn't. He kind of blows it off. He's like, well, I just didn't know you, so I figured.
Right.
And then we find out that the reason that Lucy never came back for her baby is because she took Phineas down the street to the doctor's house, and he would not let them leave because he was trying to make sure that they were both okay. And by the time she was finally able to leave, Henry had already called the police.
And the police already had the baby. And she didn't feel that she could go to the police because, there was a bunch of murdered people involved in this.
And so she fled the country. and had always planned to come back when Libby was an adult to find her again. And so the book has, at this point, we've reached this point where Libby is selling the house for quite a lot of money. She is never going to have to work again. She and Lucy have developed this relationship. Henry is like
later, I think.
Yeah, a year later. Henry is like the awkward, odd uncle. He makes people a little uncomfortable, but like, oh, it's probably his trauma. Like,
right.
you know.
Exactly. Lucy moves in with Henry, her brother, just to kind of see how he's doing and reconnect with him. Libby and Miller get together
as a couple, which
is cute because the whole story they were like very into each other.
Yeah, they were very flirty with each other, and her coworker Dido mentioned it several times. And then on the 1-year anniversary of the family meeting back again on Libby's 26th birthday, Libby and Lucy and Marco and Stella and Henry and Miller go out for dinner, and Miller surprises Libby that he has used his investigative journalism yet again, and he's found her father. Phineas is in Africa as a safari tour guide.
Right. And he's perfectly healthy.
And seems happy.
Doing well. And he's using his name, but it's spelled differently, so that's why they couldn't find him.
And so he says, I've bought us tickets to go on this safari so you can meet your father.
Right. And they decide they're going to go do this together. They've kind of split the money from the house, and the three of them are, you know, as close as family can be when you've known each other for a year.
And this is when we get Henry's last chapter.
And we get one last chilling chapter.
And it's Henry talking about how after that he had left, like basically he basically says Phineas isn't going to care about Libby. He's never been a family guy. The only time that he ever was sociable with anybody is when I made him take acid with me. And then...
right, he essentially says, like, he's not going to care about any of that. He only cares about me.
He also says that when they took acid together, some of Phineas's essence passed into him, and he's the one who scratched I Am Finn into the baseboards and into the drawers.
Henry is the one who wrote that because he's been so obsessed.
And then we find out that Henry was using his plants,
his herbal skills,
to make a love potion for Phineas.
And that's what was keeping him sick for so many years.
And at first he was like, I was trying to make him fall in love with me, but it made him sick. But then I decided it was okay because if he was sick, I could shine brighter if he was diminished. I think is what he says.
It's almost like Munchausen's by proxy, but I don't know. It's very weird.
And then he says, and that night, the night of Bertie's 30th birthday party, when Lucy told me that Finn was her baby's father, I went into his room to kill him. And so then he says that basically he, kissed him and he fell asleep. And when he woke up, Finn was gone. But now he's found. I knew Libby's big bear would find him. I look up at Miller. I look at you. I slap on my best jolly Uncle Henry smile and I say, room for one more?
He can't wait to see Finn again. And let me just say, I was so pissed.
Yeah, that last chapter made me, like, at that point I was like...
I get it was supposed to be... Right, go ahead, sorry.
Like up to that point, the book was unsettling and chilling and really upsetting in some parts.
Very.
But it was very gripping. Like, there was no point...
Agree.
I read most of it in one sitting. I was in a car, and I had 2 separate sittings. The only reason I stopped was because the car stopped.
Sure.
But, like, I basically read it in one go because I was very gripped and I wanted to know. And I thought the mystery was well done and I thought the twists and turns were interesting. And I was kind of upset with the, having a graphic rape scene without any warning. There was indication that it was coming. But, like... It
was very sudden, though, and it was
happened very suddenly.
Not only graphic, but very, like, emotionally graphic.
Yeah, it was both.
Felt like being in that moment. It was very intense.
It was really intense, which anyone who's listened to this podcast at any point knows I cannot tolerate that shit. So I was upset with that already, and I was upset with, like, Henry as the gay predator. Right. And then she added one more chapter to just hammer home this Henry is a gay predator thing. And not only that, but give, like, oh, you thought this book had a happy ending? No, because Henry's not going to be satisfied with seeing Finn again.
Right.
Like, that he's going to turn to violence or manipulation or something horrible when he does see him. So instead of getting a happy ending of Libby found her family again, you get this tension of like, is Henry about to start this horrible cycle of abuse and manipulation over on somebody who is broken free from it, which is an incredibly unpleasant and bleak ending for anything.
It's very depressing, and it also, I think, personally, so Henry, now that we've talked through the whole thing, I really think he is a sociopath. And so...
Yeah, I didn't want to say that earlier.
Right, me neither. But I really think that was the most interesting part of his character. And so to hammer home, like, that gay predator vibe in that
obsession.
Final chapter, it just was, like, not only is it sending the wrong message, but it chose the part of Henry that I think is not the most interesting, especially with all the things he did in the past that brought this about, like...
Well, and the other thing is, like...
Just could have been done differently.
So, you've got... And I think you've got an interesting situation with Lucy and Henry.
Yes.
And how people respond to trauma. Because Lucy went through some shit. She's come out very resilient. She has 3 beautiful children that she loves.
Very loving, caring, generous,
like literally, like Libby says when she sees Lucy for the first time in the house with her 2 children and her dog that she's dragged illegally across country lines. She's like, this woman would not abandon a baby.
Yeah. She just knows.
She inherently knows that. And that's the thing, I guess I'm like, what happened to Henry, as well as all the other people in the house, was awful. Yeah. What he went through living in that house was awful, but he was already sociopathic beforehand. He was sociopathic, but like, and again, this goes into like the misconceptions of sociopaths.
Yes.
Like, a person could be a sociopath and never
do anything violent
or hurt anybody.
I mean, it's very...
you still make choices.
Right. Sociopathy is not your behavior. It's a diagnosis.
Right. But like leaning into your diagnosis and just behaving
however you want
to is not something you have to do.
Yes.
Like, and the fact that Henry chose whenever he was confronted with violence and control, he responded with violence and control.
Right.
He killed Birdie's cat. We didn't even mention that.
Right.
And cut off its tail.
Right. So there's a couple of times in the book, which, again, this is a really hard story to tell linearly, because you find out so many different things at different times. And then, of course, you find out things that don't match up because the narrators disagree. And 2 of those times are, one, Clemency tells Libby and Miller that Henry killed Birdie's cat and that he tried to drown Finn in the river.
Yeah, that's the other one we didn't get into, because Finn, what happens,
but
what
Henry
we find
says
out...
both of those were accidents.
Well, Henry, he says he killed the cat on accident.
Right, he was trying to figure out how much sleeping potion to give, or so Henry says.
Again,
and then he cut off its tail
potion.
Because he was interested.
Yeah, he was like, because it was soft and she wasn't using it anymore.
Which is already, like,
he tells more of the truth about Finn.
Yes.
After we hear Clemency's version that he tried to drown Finn in the river, what we find out what actually happened is he kissed Finn without his consent, and Finn pushed him away, and he fell into the river, climbed out, and dragged Finn into the river and tried to drown him in retaliation.
And this was the night that he then further punished him by ringing the doorbell, turning him into David, and getting him locked away. So there's multiple times throughout the book that we're given more than one version of events.
And Henry's is almost never the trustworthy one.
No, and it's always centered around Henry disagreeing with reality. But, you know, that was just another reason why I was so disappointed that last chapter really focused on that aspect of him. Just because, like,
Finn,
right, there were so many interesting moments. I mean, dark, messed up moments, but interesting moments in Henry's repertoire of things he did that just felt like not only an ill-chosen opportunity, but a missed opportunity. Like, you could have made the end of that book really have an impact, and instead the end of the book made me dislike the rest of the book more.
Yeah, the end of the book just made me feel vaguely queasy.
Right.
I closed the book and I was sitting in this car and I was just like, I don't feel good.
Right.
Which, I mean, sometimes that's what a book is going for.
Well, sure, but this wasn't in that. It didn't feel like that.
It didn't feel like that. It felt like... Yeah, I felt like sure, his obsession with Finn was mixed in there, right? Like, no person is like a bunch of separate things that don't have anything to do with each other.
Absolutely.
Like, he's gay and a sociopath.
Yes.
And he has obsessive tendencies. So he obsessively focuses on another man and disregards his feelings on the matter because he is a sociopath. So, like, even, like, allowing for that, it still felt like it was focusing on, like, this is a gay predator.
Right. It was just,
you know,
the way those moments were written were not...
And it was, I mean, like, he knows, too. Because, like, I mean, he literally says that he slaps on a jolly smile, like an Uncle Henry smile.
Yeah.
Like, he's putting on a mask for everybody else there. Like, oh, I'd like to see my old friend Finn again.
Very much
Not
so.
like I'm going to, like, force myself back into this man's life and do God knows what to him.
Right. Something horrible is going to happen. But, you know, I think this is also another interesting moment because at the end of the book, I will say that is one of the only times I looked back and understood why she chose first person for Henry.
Yes.
Just because he's so unreliable that
and
I don't know how...
he's so self-focused.
Right. Very focused on himself, very much focused on his version of events.
Yeah, no, his
I don't think you could
have
have written him as third person without giving it away.
Yeah, you would have given it away. No, I 100% understood why she did it. I still feel like it pulled me out of the story.
It was still very jarring. But I understood why she chose it. Though, I mean, you could have just done the whole story that way, I guess. In different points of view. But, you know, I will say I really struggled with the beginning of it. Just because there's so many different points of view. There's 2 different timelines. Yeah. And I chose to listen to part of it as an audiobook.
This would be a hard book to listen to.
That did not work out. If you're listening right now and you want to read this book, please read it and don't listen to it.
Yeah, like the prologue here is from Henry's point of view. And then it goes into Libby's point of view, and then it jumps to Lucy, and then it jumps to Henry again, and you're just like...
And it doesn't tell... I mean, like, you'll figure it out in the prose.
Have you watched The Witcher?
Yeah. Yeah.
Karina and I have not finished The Witcher yet, but I think we actually complained about The Witcher in the last episode. God damn it. The Witcher is one of those shows that I'm like, I'm into The Witcher now. I don't want to be, and I have a lot of complaints, but it's also engaging enough that I keep turning it back on.
Well, I played all the games, so
oh yeah, yeah. I've played The Witcher games. I've never read the novels.
Me neither.
But The Witcher, I think the show itself did not acknowledge that the 3 different main characters were in different timelines until 5 or 6 episodes in. Like, I'd figured it out myself through context clues, like, about 4 episodes in. Right. But it was 5 or 6 episodes into the show before they were like, oh, yeah, these are different timelines. And I was like, that's narratively confusing. And this book is kind of the same way.
Yes. And, like, I'm fine with people relying on context clues, but those context clues better be good and early. Yeah. Like...
I mean, this book, I think you had to be about halfway through the book before you're like...
Before you finally felt like you knew who everyone was and where and when they were.
And when they were, yeah.
Oh, yeah. There was a period of time where...
I mean, the first... Yeah, when does the book separate? Like, into...
Well, there's part 1,
it's after
2,
she
3,
kills
and
Michael,
4.
right?
Yes, it is after she kills Michael. I think it's in part 3 when part 3 starts. And each part...
Yeah, so...
part 1's kind of like a prologue. Part 2's kind of setting everything up. Part 3 is when all that information starts to come out. And then part 4 starts a year afterwards. And it's just kind of everything wrapping up. But, yeah, it definitely... If you just have to pay close attention, or it's very easy to get confused. Because this book really... expects you to figure out a lot of things that are unsaid.
Which it's a mystery, so I get it. And I do feel like there were enough clues for me. Like, I mean, like I said, I picked up that Lucy was Henry's sister well before the narrative actually acknowledged it. But there were other things that it was just like, I don't want to get to the last page of a book and be like, right. Oh, like that's just kind of frustrating.
Right. It should come a little sooner so you get the payoff and then you get the rest of it, you know?
Yeah,
but
it's like that's why Agatha Christie novels have a parlor room scene. That way they can do all of it before the book ends, and you have a satisfactory understanding of the situation as the book ends.
Right. I will say with this one, it was a little long until I felt that I had a satisfactory hold on things, but again, I did listen to it, and that did not help my comprehension. When I finally started reading the actual book, it was a lot clearer. Yeah. But yeah, you know, it's definitely just a weird little book.
Yeah. So, you know, from listening to this podcast, that we always rate our books on a scale of 1 to 5 bottles. Yes. How many bottles would you give this book?
I've thought about this before tonight, and I think I'm going to go with like 2 or 2.5.
2.5? I was thinking 2.5 myself.
Right. Because, like, I really did.
There's an engaging story here.
It was very engaging. And especially, like, even the darker moments, which were horrible to read, were very, like, darkly fascinating in a weird way. Like,
it was like a train wreck.
Right. She uses that effect very well. But it was really just that trope of that gay villain that really just, like...
That was really what spoiled it for me.
It really just put a nasty taste on it, you know, and... so that's my personal opinion.
Yeah, no, I'm with you.
And it could have been a little bit tighter, a little bit more cleaned up, the book,
yeah,
I think.
there are some places where I'm like, I can't believe we're still in this. Like, again, we talk about the scenes with Michael. They felt like they went on for ages. And I'm like, I know part of that was like to develop the dread, but I feel like we spent too much time with Lucy and
right, because it was before we knew who she was, so I don't feel like it had the impact it was supposed to.
Right.
Because I didn't know how she was related to the story as much, you know?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah, so what an interesting
novel. What an interesting book.
No idea what I was jumping into.
2.5 bottles from us. Take it or leave it. It is very interesting, so if that's what you're into, you know, check out. Again, the name is The Family Upstairs. It's by Lisa Jewell. Thank you guys so much for listening today. If you enjoyed this episode, you know, you can check out everything else we've done on all of the places where you get your podcasts. We're also on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, or at litliteraturePodcast.com. Thank you again, Allie, for coming on and helping us out today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for inviting me. And if you're ever looking for more reviews, you can find me at storyeyed.blog or soon storyeyedreviews.com for reviews, giveaways, lists, lots of fun.
And we'll see you guys next time. I think it'll be me and Liz again, but we'll keep you updated on the Facebook page. So until then, cheers.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. For more information, visit us at litliteraturePodcast.com or check out our Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram pages. And remember, too much work and no vacation deserves at least a small libation. Cheers!